Earlier, we started a series a couple of weeks ago on the Daniel thing. And we're living in one of the probably the most technologically changing worlds that we've ever lived in. I mean, things changing overnight, things happening so quickly, and technology that we have today, it'll be obsolete by the end of the week, probably. I mean, it's just that quick how it changes. But also, there's other changes that have taken place over the last 20, 30 years of things that used to, we would hear it and we would go, oh, can't believe that. And 30 years later, it's kind of like, oh yeah, it's okay. Tell me something new. And that's the changes we've been seeing in our culture and our society. It shifts very quickly, and we usually lean toward extremes. It's either like, well, they're wrong and we're right, or we draw the line and throw the gauntlet down, and we protest and we march and we argue and we go back and forth over these issues that have changed over the years. And we either get angry and feel frustrated and threatened, and we attack and condemn the people that don't view things and believe things like we believe them, or either we just kind of stand in the middle and just kind of go with the flow. Well, I'm with this side when I'm with them, and I'm with that side when I'm with them. But the good news, and what we've discovered in doing the Daniel thing, is that we can stand up for truth. We can stand up for what is true, do it with grace, very important, and stand out by the way that we live our lives and living a life of integrity. We see it demonstrated in the life of Jesus over and over again. You follow the life of Jesus. He was a man of truth. He didn't shy away from speaking truth into people's lives, but he did so with such grace. He did so with such humility that when he spoke the truth, people received. The only people that kind of put up a defense and got mad with him were the religious people. But he spoke the truth with grace, and he stood and he lived a life of integrity, a sinless life. And then another example, and the one we've been looking at over the last couple of weeks, is in an Old Testament prophet by the name of Daniel. And Daniel and three of his friends, they stood for truth, absolute truth. They did it with grace and they did it with humility, but they lived lives of integrity. And that's what we covered the first week, was talking about living and speaking the truth, but doing it with grace. Because here's the problem. We stand for truth, we walk in grace, but the problem that we often face is this, is that truth without grace is mean. Well, bless God, I can tell them what the truth is. I'll tell you how it's going to be. I'll tell you what you're supposed to do. And truth without grace is just being mean, okay? No other way around it. It's just being mean. And grace without truth is meaningless. Well, it'll be okay. God understands. Well, everybody's doing it. It's all right. So there's two extremes here. And Jesus modeled, Daniel modeled speaking the truth, but doing it with grace. So how do we stand amid the swiftly changing culture that we're living in? How do we stand today as Daniel did, and we stand with truth and integrity, and we speak truthfully, and we live truthfully, but we do it with grace and humility? You see, Daniel didn't organize a protest. Daniel didn't organize a petition and say, we're going to get all these people to sign this petition about how bad things are and how wrong this culture is. He didn't judge, he didn't criticize, he didn't condemn, he didn't plead his case, he didn't debate it with them back and forth. He didn't cry out, well, it's so unfair, they're so out to get me and they have it against me. He didn't do any of those things. Daniel simply made an advanced decision to stand up for his beliefs and to stand out by the way that he lived his life. And today we're going to pick up in Daniel chapter 3. And it starts like this. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide and set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. This guy's got an ego problem. I mean, he's building a statue of himself, and it's 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. And he sends out invitations to all the people, all the leaders, and he says, come to Babylon, and I want you to come to the dedication, and I want everybody to bow down and to worship this statue of me. So he instructs everyone, they get there, and he says, hey, when you get here, when you hear the sound of the music, the band strikes up and the band starts playing, he said, everybody needs to fall to the ground and everybody needs to worship the statue of me. Well, if that wasn't enough, he goes on and he says, and anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. I've discovered every time you stand up for right, every time you stand up for the truth and the right thing, you're going to face immediate opposition. You know what I'm saying? Well, this is, I just believe this is right, and I'm going to take a stand for right, and boom, man, opposition is going to come, and somebody's going to oppose you on it. He goes on, he says, so at the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever their race, their nation, or their language, he said they're to bow to the ground and worship the golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Well, sure enough, the music played, everybody hits the floor. Boom, they're down. They're worshiping this golden statue. Everybody but three. All but three. And the astrologers, they looked around and they see this massive sea of people that are all on their knees worshiping this golden image. And all of a sudden there's three images that are sticking up over the horizon. Three people that are not bound down. So the astrologers, they went to the king and they tattled on these three Jewish boys. They said everybody bowed and everybody worshiped the statue except for three individuals. And he goes on in verse 12, he said, but some of the Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, whom you have put in charge of the province of Babylon, he said, they pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods, and they do not worship the golden statue you have set up. Listen, there will always be those who get upset when we don't believe like they believe, behave like they behave, and become like everyone else. There will always be those people. You see, the thing is this, there's always pressure from society to worship the idols that everyone else is worshiping. Well, if everybody else is doing it, you need to do it as well. You need to be like everybody else, so you need to worship what we worship. You need to act like we act. You need to behave like we behave, believe like we believe. And there's pressure from society for us to worship the idols that they worship. And there's a lot of idols out there. Oh, they're not gold statues 90 foot tall and 9 feet wide, but they're just as big. Like the idol of materialism. Having more. There's a lot of people that worship that idol. Read a story about Carl. He was an active member of a church, and he went to see his pastor for some advice. And Carl complained to his pastor. He said, I'm severely depressed. Business is bad. My wife has left me. The bill collectors are after me, and I'm on the verge of a nervous breakdown. And the minister tried to offer him some solace, all that he could, and he said, tell you what, Carl, he said, go home, pick up your Bible, open it at random, ask the Lord for guidance, and read the first two words you see. They'll provide you with the answers that you're looking for and the advice that you need. Carl looked at his pastor. He said, the first two words? Just read the first two words? And he said, yeah, that's right, the first two words. And so the pastor didn't hear from Carl for several months. One day he sees Carl in town, and Carl's driving a Rolls Royce. Gets out of it, and he's got this sweet little babe on his arm. And the pastor walks over to him, and he said, well, I see your situation has changed, Carl. He said, everything going well. And he said, yes, it is, Pastor. He said, I did exactly what you told me to do. I went home that day, I opened my Bible, I read the first two words that I saw, and that gave me my answer. And he said, well, Carl, I'd be real interested to know what those two words that you read were. And he said, it was easy. He said, I opened my Bible, and the first two words I read were chapter 11. If there's one idol our society worships, it's materialism. Here's something I bet you've noticed, and I've noticed as well, the more a person has, the more they want. The more we have, the more we want. And we can thank the fast food industry for this, especially one that begins with a Mac in front of it. Because what did they do? We'd go up there and we'd think, I'm hungry, I want to get a hamburger. You'd say, I'd like a hamburger, please. I say, you want fries with that? Well, yeah, that'd be nice. Hey, you want to make that a combo with a drink? Sure, I want more. And how about supersizing it? Not just an average, you want a big size. Well, yeah, supersize that. And hey, you want an apple pie for dessert? You see how it works? That's fast food, but we do that with a lot of things. Your desire for newer and better and nicer stuff, it's an appetite. And appetites have a one-word vocabulary, and its word is more. We want more. You feed an appetite, and what happens? It grows. For example, many of you will leave this service in a few minutes, and you're going to go eat. Go to a restaurant, you'll go home and have lunch, and you'll push away from that table, and you're going to rub your belly. I know some of you, okay, because you're just like me. You'll rub that belly when you finish that meal, and you'll go, oh, man, I'm stuffed. I'm full as a tick. I just couldn't eat another bite. I am so full and satisfied. And about 3:30, 4 o'clock this afternoon, and some of us a lot earlier than that, we're going to be rummaging around in the pantry or at the refrigerator, aren't we? I mean, what happened to that? Oh, man, I'm so full, I couldn't eat another bite. What happened? We have an appetite, and it grows. You feed it, it grows. We think if we just add a little bit more, we'd be okay. So every time you feed an appetite, it grows. It grows. I mean, look at clothing. What we had last year. Styles change. You're out of style if you're wearing what you wore last year. It changes. We got to have more. The toys that we grew up with. You know, I had a pad of paper and a pack of Crayola crayons, and I mean that was good. And then it evolved to you got to have little technology things and more stuff. And now toys today are just what you had last Christmas and played with. It's obsolete. This Christmas we got to have newer. We got to have better. How many of you have an iPhone or a phone? How many of you get upgrades? Update. Why? Because, you know, that thing's a year old. Come on. You know, I mean, they got a newer, better one now. Things change. Our appetites for more change. We do it with automobiles. We do it with appliances. Spouses. Culture displays idols between every episode of the favorite show that you watch. They display idols at the beginning of every movie that you go to see. They display idols during every timeout of the game. They put it on radio, internet, media, billboards, catalogs. I mean, it's all constantly reminding us that we'd be somebody, that everybody would love us if we would bow and worship at these idols' feet or we bought these products. Now understand this morning, I'm not saying these are bad things. You know, it's bad if you got the new iPhone 17. I mean, it's bad if you've got the newest and the latest. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying what we worship. If we bow and we worship these things, next thing you know, we bow and we buy things that we don't need simply because we want more. We want more. And suddenly we feel pressure from all around us to bow and worship the idols of culture. And materialism, that's just one thing. We bow and we worship the idol of popularity, of success, of self-gratification. We eat and drink what they eat and drink. We seek acceptance and to be a part of this particular group, so we worship that. We drive this particular vehicle, we wear that. We want a spouse that looks like their spouse, or better yet, we'll just try to get their spouse. We want what everybody else has. We want to bow and we want to worship what we want. And pretty soon we find ourselves in what Paul described in Romans 1:25. This is what he had to say. He said, they traded the truth for God for a lie, and they worshiped and served the things of God created instead of the Creator Himself. If we haven't made an advanced decision to stand for truth and what is right, it's extremely hard to stand up when the pressure is being put on to bow down. It goes on in verse 13, then Nebuchadnezzar, he flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. And when they were brought in, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or worship the golden statue that I have set up? I'll give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I've made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. We'll give you one more chance to fit in if you'll just believe like we believe and behave like we behave and do as we do. I mean, don't be a fanatic. Come on, don't be one of those religious nuts that it goes to the extremes of what you believe. I mean, just don't be a fanatic. Loosen up. I mean, if you want to be a part of this group now, you're going to have to bend and bow a little bit here and there. So we bow. We bow in areas of sexual purity and marriage, in morals and in ethics, in financial integrity. We bow in the area of personal habits, character. We feel pressured to join a conversation that we shouldn't even join in. We feel pressure to participate in an activity that we know we shouldn't participate in, or to entertain things that we should be running from. We fear rejection and ridicule and standing out, and we fear just being different. We fear the backlash of what other people are going to think and say about us if we take a stand for truth. He goes on, he says, if you refuse, you'll be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace, and then what God will be able to rescue you from my power? Refusal to bend and bow will result in immediate fire from others. Fire of objection. They'll object. The object. You'll be the object of conversation. You'll be object of ridicule. You'll be misunderstood. You'll be isolated from the group. He goes on, verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego replied, "O King Nebuchadnezzar, we don't need to defend ourselves before you." He goes on and says, if we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us, and He'll rescue us from your power. And I just think this is so neat, these last two words. They're saying, hey, it's fine. We'll take our chances with our God. We believe He's able to deliver us, and they wasn't belligerent. They wasn't being cruel. They wasn't being in-your-face, self-righteous. Well, let me tell you how it's going to be. They told Him how they felt, and then they showed humility and grace. They said, Your Majesty. If we're thrown in, that's fine, but our God's able to save us. Your Majesty. And then it goes on. He says, but even if He doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, Your Majesty, showing humble respect, Your Majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you've set up. It wasn't debatable with them. It wasn't situational. Well, we may worship now if He heats that furnace up pretty good. We may just bow down just this time. It wasn't situational. There was never any question about it. They said, if He does, great. If He doesn't, that's fine as well. But we're not going to compromise and bow. Two things stood out to me about how they made their stand here. And just give them to you real quick. And the first one was this. They made an advanced decision. They settled it in their heart in advance. Before all this ever happened, before the statue was even erected, before any of this stuff, they had already decided in their hearts that, hey, we're going to be true to our God. We're going to be true to His Word, to the truth of His Word. They had already settled the fact of who we're going to worship, okay? Who gets our worship and our devotion. They were all in. Their hearts were fixed. They were totally committed to living the truth. So they had made an advanced decision and settled it in their heart. And the second thing was the total trust in God's ability. They were like, okay, we made this decision. We're going to take our stand, and then we're going to trust in God's ability to take care of us. They had decided to do what was right and trust God with the outcome. Let's read on. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded that the furnace be heated 7 times hotter than usual. And then he ordered some of the strongest men in his army to bind the 3 Hebrew children up and throw them in the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and they threw them in the furnace, fully dressed in pants, turban, robes, and garments. And because the king in his anger had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men into the furnace. Verse 24, but suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped to his feet in amazement, and he exclaimed to his advisors, "Didn't we tie up and throw 3 men into the furnace?" And yes, Your Majesty, we certainly did. And then I love this, verse 25. He said, Look, I see 4 men unbound walking around in the fire unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god. Clue in and tune in to this one. If you've missed everything else I've said to this point, please catch this. If you will stand for truth, if you'll stand and take a stand for what is right, and you'll do it with grace and humility, and you'll stand out by the way that you live, by living a life of integrity, then here's the outcome, is that you will never stand alone. You will never stand alone. You see, God's not afraid of fire, and He's not afraid of opposition. He's not afraid of the ridicule. When you're overwhelmed with pressure to conform, to bend and to bow and to blend in like everyone else, when you feel like you're the only one standing up for truth, when you feel like you're the only one trying to do the right thing, remember, you never stand alone. In fact, Jesus said these words. He said, "Never will I leave you or forsake you." He's a very present help in our times of need when the pressure is on. He was present in a foreign land, in a pagan land with some of his Jewish teenagers. He was present during the night in a den full of lions, as we talked about last week. He's present in a furnace that's heated 7 times the normal heat. If He's present in all these places, don't you think that He would be present in your home? Don't you think He would be present in your classroom, in your neighborhood, in your office, in the place where you work, in the party that you're at? Don't you think that He will be present at these places when we take a stand for truth with grace and humility, and we stand out by living a life of integrity and doing the right thing? Don't you think He'll show up? Because here's what I've discovered is simply this. God will stand with those who stand with Him. Doesn't matter if you're a teenager, doesn't matter if you're a senior adult, anywhere in between. Those who will stand for God, God says, "I will stand for you." In verse 26, then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace, and he shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." To which I like to read into the story. They're in there going, you were wrong, we were right. I know this really burns you up. You know, that we're not burning up. And then, yeah. I read that into the story. In fact, if I had been in the fiery furnace, my response would have been, if he said, "Hey, come out here, come on, come outside," my response to him would have been, "Hey, why don't you come in here and get me? Why don't you come in here and get me? Why don't you come in here and get used to what you're going to be feeling for all eternity, these fire and flame? Why don't you just come in here and get me?" And I have to admit today I struggle with the grace part, okay? I have to work on that. But the result of standing up for right and standing out with integrity and standing alone when everybody else is bowing and placing our total trust in God for the results, it said, "So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, the officials, the governors, the advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair of their head was singed. Their clothes were not scorched. They didn't even smell like smoke." That's pretty powerful. And on top of all that, and most of all, God got the glory. In 28, then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent His angel to rescue His servants who trusted in Him." And then he goes down and closes out that chapter. He says this, he said, "There is no other God who can rescue like this." He said the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego to even higher positions in the province of Babylon. When you stand for truth and what's right, and you decided in advance in your heart that, hey, this is right, This is God's Word. This is God's truth. And you stand for that truth and what's right in God's eyes. And you don't do it self-righteously. You don't do it trying to prove a point. You don't do it drawing a line and you're right or left, it's heaven or hell, in or out. I mean, you're not throwing a gauntlet down, but you're just simply decided in your heart that this is God's Word, this is the truth, and this is what I'll stand up for. And then we stand out by living a life of integrity, just doing the right thing over and over again when everyone's watching, when no one is watching. And you stand firm and alone, even when you have to stand by yourself, trusting God with the outcome. And God says you never stand alone. And the whole deal is it starts in our hearts. It starts in our hearts. The very first thing we read in this series, Daniel 1:8, Daniel purposed in his heart he would not defile himself. It's a heart issue. Who or what's going to be first in our heart? Who's going to have our full devotion, our full worship? And that's a decision that every single one of us have to make. Who's going to be first? Who will we worship? I want to bow for prayer, and the band's going to lead us in a closing song. Father,